potentially drive up prices, drive up costs of things like insurance and shipping for tankers. And again, we'll have that ripple effect on the global economy. That's the type of thing that we could see sustained depending on the direction this goes in. There's been a lot of suggestion as well that this isn't something that is incredibly likely, and that's generally attributed to economic interdependence, which I don't want to suggest doesn't matter. It absolutely does, with things like Iranian oil flows to China. But I think if the 2020s have taught us anything so far, it's that economic ties don't always prevent conflict. Russia was incredibly reliant on European markets for its oil and gas exports. That didn't stop them from invading Ukraine and doubling down. Western oil majors pulling out of Russia, which are a very important part of the Russian energy sector, didn't really seem to have a major impact on Moscow's calculus in that regard. And Iran is even less integrated with the global economy than Russia was when the war took place. I think in that regard, Tehran is also going to be aware of some of the pressure points for this administration. The president was, in the run-up to this conflict, voicing discontent with rising oil prices. That's clearly a key issue that they do not want to see, sustained as things go on. So I think that probably factors into Iran's calculus somewhere. I'm hesitant to think that the whatever kind of strategic decision making is taking place in Iran is really going to hinge on what about what happens to the Chinese teapot refiners. I think that's it's an important part of their ability to continue getting revenue and continue funding their operations. But in a moment of existential threats, if that's the way the thinking is going, it's hard to say that that's something that's going to tip the balance. Coming back to some of the other risks, though, there are bottlenecks elsewhere in the Gulf. There are infrastructure choke points. Roughly 70 to 75% of liquids that come out of the Gulf, and by that I mean crude, condensate, and refined products, flow through about 9 facilities, and that includes Kharg Island in Iran. There are a lot of other terminals in the Gulf, but these are the high volume export terminals that are really, I think, represent some of the very critical bottlenecks that could emerge if there were to be a disruption at any of them, and this would really amplify the price impact without any activity taking place in the strait, and depending on a big picture situation, this is something that could even last longer. Now, the difference between that and a closure of the strait is, of course, that the OPEC producers in the region could, in theory, tap some of their spare capacity to make up for that lost supply. So the risk is slightly lower in that regard. But I think, again, getting a little bit too focused on the strait is something that could potentially.
You're watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Good afternoon to you and welcome into Fox 35 News Plus. I'm Garrett Wymer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon, live on Fox Local and on YouTube. It is 4 o'clock, and that means it's time for today's Top 4 at 4, where we break down 4 of the big stories that we're tracking in the Fox 35 newsroom this afternoon. And joining me for today's Top 4 at 4 is Fox 35 News anchor and reporter Marlisa Goldsmith. And Marlisa, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here with you, Garrett.
So our main story today, we're really just kind of taking one big story, international story that we are tracking. So we're going to look at the top 4 things that you really need to know about this ongoing Middle East conflict that continues to develop and in some ways continues to escalate.
Yeah. So first things first, just earlier today, we learned that Iran launched a retaliatory missile strike on U.S. military base there in Qatar in response to the U.S. airstrikes that we saw happen over the weekend on Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, the Pentagon has reported that there were no casualties. Qatar's foreign ministry called the attack brazen aggression and says it successfully intercepted Iranian missiles. Now, there was a tweet that was posted, and I want to read this to you regarding Qatar condemning the Iranian attack. It says, in part, the state of Qatar strongly condemns the attack that targeted Udeid Air Base by Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We consider this a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of the state of Qatar, its airspace, international law, and the United Nations Charter. We affirm that Qatar reserves the right to respond directly in a manner equivalent with the nature and scale of this brazen aggression in line with the international law. We reassure that Qatar's air defenses successfully thwarted the attack and intercepted Iranian missiles. A detailed statement regarding the circumstances of the attack will be issued later by the Ministry of Defense.
And we know since then, I'll give you a live look at the White House. President Trump had been in the Situation Room with his national security advisors and defense officials as well. We've also seen reports from Fox News that Israel has fired more strikes at Iran since that as well. We can give you a live look right now at Jerusalem, where night has fallen as well. But certainly interesting developments today, obviously, coming just a couple of days after the U.S. strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. You spoke with John Hanley, a UCF political science lecturer. I know you talked with him just a little bit ago, and one of the things that you talked about was Iran warning Qatar that this attack was going to happen.
Yeah, he said that this was kind of a unique circumstance that we were in. I spoke with him just a couple of hours ago about seeing this unfold, and he said that, the situation was that we kind of had advance warning that something was going to happen, so we could have had options to decide what we were going to do.
It's stunning to see how complicated this conflict appears to be. So we're talking about attacks on U.S. bases, but there's some word that the Iranians advised Qatar and the United States in advance of that, which suggested maybe they were looking to limit casualties. And so seems that there's stuff going on behind the scenes, which we're not really used to when we look back at conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan in the last 20 years. On both sides, there are reasons to avoid escalating this conflict. Right. On the side of the Iranians, they're clearly in a somewhat diminished position. They've lost their air defenses. They've been kind of embarrassed in Gaza and in Lebanon, their proxies. But on the United States' side, we've had, two major conflicts in the Middle East, and there's fairly strong public opinion saying we don't want a third. And so that's giving an incentive to both sides to avoid something that would get out of hand.
And so, we're seeing some, obviously Iran responding and retaliating with these attacks today, but we've also seen some experts say it seems that they may be looking for, an off-ramp in some ways. And I think, to John Hanley's point there, kind of recognizing their diminished capacity after those attacks.
Yeah.
Our second point today is hearing from other officials within the Trump administration, specifically Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Vice President J.D. Vance, making clear that the war here is with Iran's nuclear capabilities, not with the Iranian government.
Right. And there's a big difference there, Garrett. So on Sunday, some of President Trump's top national security officials spent much of the day insisting that his administration doesn't want to bring about an end to Iran's government, only its nuclear program, like you just mentioned. And then President Trump left the door open for that. Well, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, they've all insisted that the U.S. was only interested in dismantling Iran's nuclear capabilities. Vice President Vance told one media outlet, "We don't want to achieve regime change. We want to achieve the end of the Iranian nuclear program." And we're looking at a post here from President Donald Trump where he took to Truth Social to post saying it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why would there be a regime change? MAGA.
And so you're kind of getting some conflicting messaging there. And that was one thing that the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, was asked about earlier today, and here's what she said about where things stand when it comes to that question of regime change.
The president's posture and our military posture has not changed. The president was just simply raising a question that I think many people around the world are asking. If the Iranian regime refuses to give up their nuclear program or engage in talks, we just took out their nuclear program on Saturday night, as you all know. But if they refuse to engage in diplomacy moving forward, why shouldn't the Iranian people rise up against this brutal terrorist regime? That's a question the president raised last night. But as far as our military posture, it hasn't changed.
So she's saying, he's simply raising the question, but it's not necessarily the policy here of the United States or the military to be pursuing that in this instance.
Yeah, she tried her best to clarify there.
Part number 3 of this we want to break down is Russia, because obviously this is a big, a big part of this is how some of these other nations may react and respond. We've seen Russia come out and condemn the U.S. strikes, and also some interesting words from Russia's ambassador to the UN about all this as well.
Been very outspoken since the attack happened. Russia's United Nations ambassador is claiming that the Trump administration's devastating airstrikes on Iran have opened what he's calling a Pandora's box, and warning that this could lead to a global nuclear catastrophe. Now, speaking during a meeting of the Secretary Council on Sunday, Vasily Nebenzia said that Russia vehemently condemns the irresponsible, dangerous, and provocative actions taken by the USA against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a sovereign country and a UN member state. But obviously, people are sitting here wondering, what more consequences are we going to face? So we knew after the airstrikes happened on Saturday that obviously retaliation would come. We just didn't know how soon or to what magnitude. But interesting point that a lot of people are coming out and being outspoken, not in support of what's going on here.
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, lawmakers, including some Republicans, have brought up a House resolution looking at whether President Trump potentially, abused his authority in the attack on Saturday to begin with.
And I spoke with, again, the UCF political science lecturer about this, and unfortunately, he said that this is nothing new. In fact, President Trump falls in line with being one of many, just the latest commander-in-chief, not waiting for Congress to kind of weigh in on war and what he plans to do when he approved Saturday's U.S. military strikes on those nuclear sites in Iran. Members of Congress from both sides of the aisle had a lot to say about President Trump skirting Congress's role here, some even calling this unconstitutional, Garrett.
It's not optional, Donald. It's not. The framers of the Constitution actually gave Congress the power to declare war for a reason, so the American people, through their elected representatives, would have the opportunity to debate the issue and make some decisions as it relates to what's in the best interest and the national security of the American people. Donald Trump and the administration chose to ignore the Constitution. And so they're going to have to come before Congress and explain their justification for an offensive military strike against Iran.
And that's Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House. He is a congressman from New York. But one of the Republicans who's kind of been outspoken about this is Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky. He represents the northern part of the state there. And President Trump has not taken kindly to Congressman Massie's kind of stance on this. He this is a Truth Social post, and I zoomed out. I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I zoomed out so you could kind of see the whole thing. This is basically him talking about Congressman Massie. This was a post from yesterday afternoon, and then again today. He said, "Get this bum out of office ASAP." It sounds like they are taking some steps to give him a primary challenger over his stance on this. So really interesting to see. But again, like you were saying, this is not necessarily a new thing. We've seen this, it seems increasingly, as years have, as years have passed, when it comes to the executive kind of asserting this authority more so than the legislative. The big story today, obviously, continuing to monitor things out of the Middle East here. I'll give you another live look in Jerusalem, where we have also been monitoring for any more attacks there. So we continue to track this story. Marlisa, we appreciate you joining us for our top 4 at 4, where we break down the 4 things you need to know about this ongoing Middle East conflict. We're going to be back with more Fox 35 News Plus after this.
You're watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Fox 35 Storm Team meteorologist Noah Berggren joins me now. And Noah, pretty wet and rainy weekend in a lot of ways, but things going to be drying out a little bit for the start of the week here.
Yeah, Garrett, and tonight we're not seeing a lot of rain out there. In fact, things are pretty limited across most of the area, which was to be expected for today, tomorrow, to start off the week. I'll show you the radar right now. There's really not a lot going on. In fact, currently it's actually pretty dry and quiet. Now, over the weekend, especially Sunday, now on the end of last week, we thought the rain chances would stay really low. In hindsight, we had a couple of surprise downpours that really perked up around the metro, around Seminole and Sumter, Lake County, especially yesterday afternoon. I was at Disney Springs yesterday, and yeah, there was a pretty good downpour in the afternoon. Overall, the coverage was limited. In the grand scheme of things, it was not high. But today it's back to what we thought it would be the weekend and through a good part of this week, which if you look to the side of me, it was really not a lot of rain. And in fact, there's just a handful of small showers around the villages in Ocala. The overwhelming majority of us today, tonight, tomorrow night will stay dry. That will not last, though. The rain chances are expected to come back up big time as we head into later this coming week. And you can see since Friday that easterly flow of the clouds coming in out there, and there's not a lot of big thunderstorms, at least for today on the satellite. So let's take a look at the temperatures across the United States, because the big story is what's going on in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Look at these heat index values. 111 in Philly, 107 in New York, 105 in Boston, 104 in Syracuse, 100 in Lexington, 104 in Raleigh, 106 in Nashville, just, my friend Garrett, just 97 in Orlando. So maybe a flight south for people in the Northeast would cool them off quite a bit. In fact, it's almost 15 degrees lower here than it is in parts of the Ohio Valley in the Midwest in terms of how it feels on this last full week of June for right now. All right, temperature 96 in Tallahassee where there's more sunshine. Just 88 in West Palm and Miami with a strong onshore flow from the Atlantic helping to keep things a little bit lower. Heat index across the state, this is typical. It's the end of June. This is nothing to write home about. And over the next several days, the heat index will just fluctuate, peaking somewhere at about 100 as we head through the end of this coming week. So temperatures overnight will fall into the mid-70s, which is average. Maybe a thunder shower in the western part, not much. Now tomorrow, big day for weather in the I-75 area. Gainesville, how about that? 98 the high temp tomorrow. That would be a record. 97 in Ocala. A little bit more sunshine. The atmosphere is a little bit more favorable for hot weather there. So that's why there's a huge disparity in the temperatures tomorrow. 95 the Villages, 98 Gainesville, and just 87 New Smyrna, 92 in Sanford. About the average high this time of the year is somewhere about 91 or so. All right, also last week we had the peak sun angle for Central Florida for the year. So starting this week and going forward, the sun angle is getting lower each day, and we're actually losing daylight now, effective yesterday after the summer solstice. So the days are now getting shorter and the sun angle is getting lower, believe it or not. And we will soon reach the hottest time of the year here in just a few weeks. And then the average highs will start coming down, believe it or not. So yeah, 2025 has moved along as it seemingly always does, and we are not that far away from being into some cooler weather coming into Florida again in maybe about 8 to 10 weeks from now. Temperatures, and that means tropical season. Now let's talk some tropics. The water is plenty warm in the Gulf, the Caribbean, the Atlantic for tropical activity. There's been a lot made of this, and I don't want to give you the perception that this has been a very quiet year, because we're only a few days behind the schedule. Now, if you look at this graphic, the average first named storm is June 20th. We're only a few days past that, because I've seen some things online circulating saying, and the headlines were, "Where are all the hurricanes?" That's a little bit misleading, because we've had several people email us, the storm team, so just wanted to address that. I want you to be crystal clear that this is not unheard of. In fact, this is a good point that many of us are asking and wondering, because we've had several really busy Junes the last few years. And that's given us the perception that June should have all these hurricanes and storms. It's actually not. And if you see there, the average is one named storm per June. And it normally occurs June 20th. So this is actually what's normal. Most years, if there's anything, there's one, and it's at the end of June. So this is not that unheard of to have a quiet June for the hurricane season. It's just recently we've had so many way busier, earlier than normal seasons that we think that there should be. If we go deep into July without a named storm, then it'll start getting more of a headline, and then we can really start to say it was a quiet year. You see the average B named storm averages the third week of July. So we'll see. But regardless, it does look like no tropical activity in the Atlantic through the end of the month, which will make this the first June since 2019 without a named storm in the Atlantic basin, which, again, is notable considering last year we had Beryl at about this time of the year, and Beryl was a major hurricane in the Caribbean. Big reason why things are quiet, there's two big reasons, A and B reasons, number one, number two. Number one is dust. You see all the brown on the satellite I've added with the clouds. Dust prevents thunderstorm clouds from forming, which then in turn turn into hurricanes and tropical storms. There's just too much of it in the basin, which is good news. It's keeping a lid on things, but if it occurs, it's this time of the year, A. B, and number two, the air over the whole basin is sinking. That's something called the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's a circulating part of weather across the globe that dictates where the air broadly is rising or falling. And right now it's rising in the Pacific, sinking in the Atlantic. That's why there's been so many hurricanes already in the Pacific and none in the Atlantic, is because broadly the air is slowly sinking. We call that subsidence, and that makes it hard for clouds to form. So that, combined with the fact there's all the dust in the air, it's not a surprise that things have been quiet. And that's how it'll stay for at least another week, maybe 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, we'll see what happens. But for right now, things are quiet. And it's a really interesting chart this year for the water temps because it's way different than last year. You see all the red on there, that's above average, the blue is below. If you look in the Caribbean and the southern Atlantic, it's below average for the long-term average. Last year was the hottest on record, so we've had a huge cool down. However, the water close to home, in the Gulf, off of Florida's east coast, you see all that red, is very warm. So it's an interesting year because there might be less storms deep in the tropics or that track long ways off of Africa, and more that form really close to home and strengthen rapidly before impacting land. So it's going to be, every year is different, and this year certainly looks to be different given the look across the Atlantic basin of how the temperatures are. And a reminder that Andrea will be the first name up for this year once we do get a named storm, followed by Barry. So Garrett, that 7-day reads like this, hot off the press. Low rain chances tomorrow, Wednesday. We're in the low to mid 90s. This is the Orlando numbers, but that's typical for this time of the year. Average high, again, 91. Thursday, rain chances in the afternoon and evening come up dramatically. They go from 20 to 70. That's a huge uptick. So Thursday, Friday afternoons and evenings, we'll have a lot of downpours, a lot of storms scattered across the area to track. And then for right now, the weekend, if you're trying to make plans, beach in it, theme park in it, anything outdoors, there will be a return to more typical rain chances for what's normal this time of the year, about 50 to 60%. From the end of June through the middle of August, generally about 50, 60, 70%, averaging 60. That's about what's normal for the time of year. So the next 2 days are pretty dry, pretty sunny each day, and then the rain chances are going to come back up big time as we head into later this week.
All right, sounds good. Fox 35 Storm Team Meteorologist Noah Bergeron, we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, sir.
We're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
You're watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Welcome back into Fox 35 News Plus. I'm Garrett Wymer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon. The ongoing Middle East tensions are fueling uncertainty as well in the oil markets, especially after Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz.
If Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, is there a plan by the U.S. to add oil to the global market? We saw the Biden administration do a strategic petroleum release. Is there a plan?
I can assure you the administration is actively and closely monitoring the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranian regime would be foolish to make that decision.
That's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt asked about the potential of Iran shutting down that critical passageway that about, I believe, 20% of global oil shipments go through. So what does all this mean for gas prices? What does it mean for oil prices? What are the factors we need to watch? And really, what does it mean for drivers, especially drivers here in Florida? I talked about that this afternoon with Mark Jenkins, who's the spokesman for AAA, the Auto Club Group.
You know, anytime that you have a big conflict, especially if it's going to threaten global oil supplies, then you would tend to see oil prices increase. After the conflict really escalated between Israel and Iran last week, you saw oil prices increase. To give you some context, the price of crude was averaging around $60 or so last month during the month of May. And then now with the heightened tensions overseas, you have oil prices that are trading at around $73 to $75, so almost a $15 jump. That's pretty significant when you talk about gas prices, because about half of the price of what we pay at the pump is influenced by the price of crude oil. So when there's a big swing in oil prices, you typically see a big swing in gas prices as well.
And what are some of those factors that when it comes to the Middle East that impact those prices and those markets?
When we talk about factors, so it really, again, just comes back down to supplies. So if there's a foreign conflict that, let's say that there's a refinery that's bombed. If in this case, if the Strait of Hormuz is shut down, then that interrupts the supply of crude oil to get to the destination. In this case, Iran has threatened to retaliate with the United States by shutting down the Straits of Hormuz. And in doing so, that means there's less oil being delivered to countries like China, India, Japan. And while that doesn't directly affect our supplies here in the United States, that just means that there's less oil going into that global bucket. And so these countries will need to pull oil from somewhere else. And if there's less supply out there, then prices would typically increase as a result.
What are we seeing right now here in Florida? Obviously subject to change, but kind of trend-wise, what are we seeing at the moment?
It's been interesting here in the past several months. We're kind of on this cycle where gas prices will increase on Monday and Tuesday, and then they'll decline through the rest of the week and into the weekend before shooting back up again on Monday. The average price as we talk right now is about $3.10 per gallon. That's about 15 cents more expensive than a week ago, but pretty much on par with what we were paying about a month ago. And about 25 cents less than what we were paying this time last year.
So what are some ways for folks to save on gasoline? Some things to keep in mind when there is this uncertainty and we there is the chance we see prices go up.
Yeah, so first and foremost, if you can spot the trends, then that does help. So if gas prices do typically rise on Monday and Tuesday and then fall through the weekend, then maybe the weekend or your morning commute on the way to work on Monday morning would be the better time to fill up your gas tank, because Monday afternoon and Tuesday, you might see an increase. Otherwise, take advantage of different reward programs that are out there. AAA does have one where you can save money at the gas pump. And then just pay attention to the way you drive. If you're slamming on the accelerator, slamming on the brakes, basically if you're kind of an aggressive driver, you're going to burn through that gasoline a lot faster than a more conservative driver.
So what's the bottom line here, Mark? What should folks here in Florida keep in mind as we're kind of watching all this and taking this in?
I think just don't panic. The good news is that we're in a situation right now where it appears that there's some optimism in the market that things could be resolved. There might be various reports out there that gas prices are going to skyrocket. That doesn't appear to be the case, at least not at this very moment. Sure, conflicts can happen and things could intensify at a moment's notice. Things are very volatile right now, but the good news is that as of right now, as of Monday afternoon, things are looking pretty good. Oil prices have come down. They're actually lower than what we were seeing last week, so that's great news. So we could potentially avoid a pretty significant increase at the pump as of right now.
We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Welcome back into Fox 35 News Plus. I'm Garrett Wymer, and thanks for joining us on this Monday afternoon, live on Fox Local and on YouTube. We are following new developments in this case out of Osceola County when it comes to the arrest of suspended Osceola County Sheriff Marcos Lopez. We have now learned that his wife has also been arrested and taken to the same jail in Lake County where he is being held. Fox 35's Randy Hildreth joining us live now via Zoom. And Randy, good afternoon. What do we know about the charge that Robin Lopez is facing?
Yeah, we know that she was arrested this morning, and as you mentioned, she is now in the Lake County Jail with her husband. So she is charged with conspiracy to use or invest proceeds from racketeering. This is a look at both of their mugshots, and what investigators are trying to do, appears in this case, is connect her to her husband. And so we know earlier this month, Marcos Lopez was arrested for racketeering and conspiracy to commit racketeering charges. He is accused of working with others to run this alleged illegal gambling ring, and Kissimmee netted about $21 million. And investigators also say that he used his position as sheriff to protect this criminal enterprise. And so now we have this bombshell that his wife has been arrested. And I spoke with a criminal defense attorney not connected to the case just to get his perspective from working as an attorney. And he says, obviously reiterating that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. But today's announcement, of course, doesn't look that great. And it now makes it appear that this may have been a family affair. So certainly some news to come out today.
What does this do for the case against Marcos Lopez?
And that was one of the questions that I had for the attorney. His name, Jeff Golub, and he says that it complicates it some. I asked him one about the timeline between Marcos Lopez's arrest earlier this month. I believe he was arrested June 5th, and then fast forward today is June 23rd. And he said, a couple things may have been going on. Big picture, law enforcement may have been waiting on some last minute evidence that they didn't have or they thought they had. And so, had to nip that in the bud before they could move forward with an arrest. But he says in terms of Marcos Lopez getting out of jail, because, he is being held on that $1 million bond, has to prove that any money that he puts up for bonds is not connected to this alleged gambling ring. He says it makes it a little bit more complicated now that his wife is in custody, considering the charges that she now faces. And so one of the things he also says is that right now she's being held with no bond, expected to have her first appearance tomorrow where she'll go before a judge. A bond is expected to be set, but now they have to figure out the money, and she will be held to that same high standard of proving that whatever money she puts up for potentially her release from jail is not tied to this alleged gambling ring. I do want to add this one note that I thought was interesting when I spoke with this criminal defense attorney, again, not connected to the case, but I asked him, was he surprised that Marcos Lopez was still in jail? Because I think a lot of people are talking about that. And he said, originally, yes. When I started the day today thinking, the suspended sheriff is still in jail. But he says, after I found out about the arrest of his wife, he says, I was curious, and obviously a lot going on behind the scenes, if maybe he knew that his wife may be arrested at some point, and maybe he decided to remain in jail. If his wife were arrested and charged and, has to go through that bond process, any money that they collect, kind of using himself as a sacrifice for his wife, and that money would go towards getting her out of jail. We know he has children. So that was just kind of an interesting perspective that he brought up today.
Yeah, interesting to think about. Still a lot of questions, still a lot we don't know about all this. Fox 35's Randy Hildreth, we appreciate you joining us. And this is a live look outside the Lake County Jail where, as you mentioned, the Osceola County suspended sheriff and his wife now both behind bars. So continuing to track that. Randy, thank you. We're also following up this afternoon on a deputy-involved shooting out of Marion County where according to investigators, a deputy was shot during a traffic stop. Joining us live now via Zoom, Fox 35's Marie Ettinger. And Marie, what do we know about what happened and the suspect?
This was actually after a traffic stop. Really, really crazy story. This woman, Brianna Harden, she's 22 years old, turning 23 in a few months. She got pulled over just for regular traffic violation and wound up getting arrested because her license had been suspended, and the deputy who pulled her over found allegedly drugs in her car. He pats her down, takes her in. As they're driving to the jail, she winds up being able to get a gun that she had hidden in the crotch area of her pants. The sheriff's office explained, yes, the deputy did the pat down, but her pants were kind of baggy, and it was a male deputy patting down a female. And so she just was able to hide this gun. And yes, her hands were in cuffs as she was sitting in the car, but the sheriff's office explained she is flexible and she was able to reach this gun. She fired off at least one shot, and just incredibly and terrifyingly, the deputy wound up grazed in the cheek, which is just so scary to think about, just how millimeters away, a few millimeters of difference, that could have been a completely different story. He wound up crashing the car. He hops out, and then fires his own weapon back into the car. Harden, she wound up hit in the hip and the shoulder. Both of them are all right. They've already been released from the hospital. And the FDLE is going to be looking into the shooting. So right now she's been booked for all the charges that she was being taken into the jail for initially. She will likely have some added for firing that weapon. But we do know this is not her first encounter with law enforcement. She is from Panama City Beach. She'd actually just gotten out of prison over there in Bay County less than a year ago for other charges where she was eluding law enforcement and was caught with drugs. She had been convicted in a couple of different cases for those.
Wild to see the gunshots on the glass of that deputy cruiser. A scary situation there. The last thing I'll ask you here before I let you go: how are they doing? I know they were taken to the hospital, the suspect and the deputy.
Yep, they've both already been released. They're going to be okay. And that's really as far as all that we know so far. So it seems like the injuries, I suppose, were definitely not nearly as bad as they could have been. We do have video that we're going to be showing you tonight at 5 of a previous chase that Harden had led an FHP trooper on. He wound up trying to stop her in a pit maneuver. She kept going anyway. She was in a stolen car in that case, drove through a daycare. The video is crazy to see. They wound up taking her in on that case, and then she went on probation. A year later, did the same thing, led officers on a chase. They found drugs in her car. In that case, she had a weapon with her too. So they booked her on that, revoked her bond for the last case, and she wound up sentenced to 3 years, but because of time served while she was awaiting her trial, she only served 2. That's why she's out now.
Wow. Looking forward to seeing that video. Fox 35's Marie Ettinger. We will stay tuned for that coming up on Fox 35 News, and we appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Fox 35 News Plus.
Sure thing. Talk to you soon.
We also want to go to Brevard County and check in with Fox 35's Esther Bauer, who joins me now live via Zoom as well. And Esther, you are tracking some more sewage spill concerns in Brevard County. This is something we've talked to you about before in Palm Bay, but now you're looking at this in a different area.
Yeah, so we actually had a viewer reach out to us over the weekend, and in this entire county, a lot of people are kind of just watching the water closely after what happened in the city of Palm Bay, where there was millions of gallons of sewage kind of sent into Turkey Creek. And here in Brevard County, all of our water systems, they all kind of feed into one another. So when this viewer reached out to us, she was miles away, nearly 15 miles away from Palm Bay, but she was going for a bike ride. This is South Melbourne Beach, really close to the Indian River County line, when she was stopped in her tracks because of what she smelt. She says, I've had my septic tank pumped. I know what sewage smells like. So that's what stopped her on this bike ride, which is at Long Point Park. We said this is very south in Brevard County, and that is a county run park. So she reached out to us saying, hey, there's some dirty water that smells bad, that doesn't look good. What could be going on here? We met her out there earlier, and it's like she said, everything stinks, everything looks rotten, and there's a kind of foam-like substance that's piling up nearby. So we were immediately like, what is going on here, and who is responsible for this? And I'll tell you, Garrett, we spent hours trying to find any city, any official to take responsibility of, hey, we're going to get crews out there. We're going to see what this is. We first asked Brevard County, because as I said, this is a county-run park. They originally told us that this was somehow tied to a water main repair that happened in Melbourne Beach last Friday. We knew that that was going on. Water customers were aware. So then we reached out to the city of Melbourne saying the county is telling us this is somehow linked to your system. City of Melbourne told us flat out, this has nothing to do with us. We do not provide it any kind of sewer or water services this south. We then heard from the county again that did link it to that Palm Bay sewage spill. They told us they had reports between June 13th and 15th of strange stuff coming on shore. So they tested it, and they tested it as just some green algae. We then reached out to Palm Bay, who told us this is, as I said, 13 miles away from Turkey Creek. They say, quote, this is 100% not connected to our spill. So that's really three agencies, not really taking responsibility for what these residents and what we did see at this site. The county then told us a little bit ago they are telling campers on site if they want to get a refund or change the reservation date, they can. They're calling it, quote, a distasteful smell that they are linking to an algae bloom. So what we know is happening is environmental health researchers were just at the site. They're taking water samples for themselves. They say two huge red flags are just the unbearable smell that this viewer smelled and we smelled being out there, as well as that white foam that's just kind of sitting in the area that can be tied to water quality threats, bad stuff in the area. So those test samples are now on their way to a lab. They, as a nonprofit, Fight for Zero, are going to be trying to see what is going on. But the big concern for this resident is the fact that people swim out there, people boat out there, people fish. It's a place to relax and vacation. So she just wanted to get it out there. She wants officials to investigate. And really the big frustration is we saw this happen in one community. Are we seeing potential pollution, water quality concerns in another?
It's the last thing you want to see kind of spreading around there. Fox 35's Esther Bauer, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Fox 35 News Plus.
Absolutely.
We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Welcome back into Fox 35 News Plus. This is a Truth Social post in the last hour from President Trump responding to the retaliatory attack by Iran on the U.S. base in Qatar. You see, he says that 14 missiles were fired, no Americans harmed, hardly any damage done. We have also seen some slightly different numbers from the Associated Press, citing officials in Qatar, that 19 missiles were fired. One of them did impact the facility, but there were, again, no casualties. But you see Trump's social post here saying, most importantly, they've gotten it all out of their system, and there will hopefully be no further hate. He goes on to say, I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. He followed that up just about 10 minutes later with this post saying, in all caps, congratulations, world, it's time for peace. We are continuing to still monitor developments with this in the Middle East, though, today, as the tensions remain high. Meanwhile, here in the United States, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have raised concerns about whether the president overstepped the bounds of the Constitution by ordering these attacks over the weekend on Iran. Marlisa Goldsmith spoke with the UCF political science lecturer John Hanley about the War Powers Act and what Congress's next steps may be.
On one level, Congress has very little to say because they've already authorized the troops to exist. They've paid for the bombs and the planes and the fuel and so forth. And so the president has the ability to direct the use of those resources. However, the president has to come back to Congress for more money to continue to use those resources and to expand on them and to continue to pay salaries. And so Congress does have a way back in. So the president does want to consult with Congress to make sure that Congress and the president aren't out of phase. If they get too far out of phase, then it may limit the president's ability to carry out activity.
Yeah. And have we seen examples of that in recent history?
Well, I think in the conflict in Libya in 2011, there was a dispute about what to do, how much authority to give to the president, and Congress instituted some limits on how money could be spent in Libya. However, that conflict ended fairly shortly after those limits were put in place, so they didn't really constrain the president that much.
Gotcha. While we're speaking about power, the War Powers Resolution of 1973, it requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of military action happening. So how is that notification supposed to take place?
Well, the president generally sends a letter to the congressional leadership and says that these troops have, or these resources have entered into conflict. And what's interesting about this is that presidents have traditionally argued that the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional. Richard Nixon, who was president, vetoed the War Powers Resolution, and it was his veto was overridden. Presidents claim that the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional, and so when they send that message to Congress, they say that they are sending the letter consistent with the rules or the provisions of the War Powers Resolution. They don't say that they're complying with the War Powers Resolution or that they agree to it. It merely, from the president's perspective, is a coincidence that they're sending this document, which is also the document that Congress believes that it's entitled to receive.
I gotcha. Okay, so Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he said that Congress was notified after the planes were out and that complied with the War Powers Act. But what sort of impacts could these Iranian strikes have on this act being brought by Congress?
Well, so then there is an additional period where now that the notification has been provided, the president is authorized to have troops or to engage in this conflict. And depending on the rules and the provisions that are being invoked, it's maybe 60 or 90 days. At the end of 90 days, the president is supposed to either receive an authorization of use of military force or a declaration of war. And if neither of those things happen, then the president is supposed to withdraw any forces or resources from the region in conflict.
Gotcha. Representatives from both parties, both sides of the aisle, have come out against these attacks. So, where are we supposed to go from here? What are Americans supposed to think about the lack of support from both parties when it comes to the acts that have taken place?
Well, I think it's very interesting. What the discussion in Congress, I think, shows is number one, the fragility of public opinion and politics around Middle East conflict. Now, maybe that will change a little bit as we see attacks against U.S. bases, and if there are, U.S. casualties as a result of that, that might move Congress more towards a direction of supporting an authorization of use of military force. Um, you know, so that's one possibility. But and it's also been shown that President Trump has significant influence over the Republican Party. He might be able to push Republicans to support an authorization of use of military force. However, it's also possible that the resolution still wouldn't pass, even though the Republicans control Congress. And I think that's something that's very interesting. The second thing I think that it shows is that there's developed not just with Donald Trump, but over decades, a gulf between the president and Congress. Presidents like Dwight Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy got resolutions from Congress to strengthen their standing in foreign conflicts. They went to Congress to try to get that authorization to gain credibility with foreign countries. But modern presidents are much less likely to do that. They don't get a resolution beforehand. And so Congress sees disrespect from the president. President sees a Congress that is unserious and is prone to put politics ahead of the national interest. And that's some big issues in our government today and longer term.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you use the term discussion. How much of a discussion do you think is really happening? I mean, this is a hotly contested topic. It's been debated from both sides of the aisle. How much discussing do you think is actually going on, or is it, arguments that's taking place?
Well, I think there's a lot of, we'll call it debate.
Okay.
This is an issue, U.S. Military intervention in this region. This is an issue that a lot of Americans have experience with, personal experience, and they have strong views about how it works and what has happened in the past. And so that means that people are likely to hold stronger opinions, more durable opinions than they would on a host of other issues. The Far East, geopolitics, the budget, right? But this is something that people and their families have experienced in recent history. And so it matters. It also splits the party coalitions a little bit. So you have conservative Republicans like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Tucker Carlson, others who are very critical of this U.S. activity, right? And then you have others who are very supportive of the president and very against the Iranians and are much more supportive of this U.S. activity. And so that's something that's kind of fascinating to watch. And because it doesn't just break down to blue versus red, it's likely that debate is going to evolve very differently than it would if it was a more partisan argument.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just have to wait and watch this play out. Speaking from a historical perspective, you brought up some things from the past. Back in October of 2002, under the Bush administration, Congress did not formally declare war against Iraq, but did approve sending U.S. military into Iraq to fight against Saddam Hussein. Regarding the formalities of how this goes on, the logistics of it, how similar do you think will follow suit dating back to 2002. Do you think that it'll be something similar, or can we expect a formal declaration of war in this situation we're in right now?
Well, the formal declaration of war is uncommon. The last time that the United States actually declared war on another country was in World War II. So more recently, we've operated under these authorizations of use of military forces, which is slightly different in an international sense because it doesn't invoke all of the same treaty obligations, for instance. But functionally, from the perspective of the United States government and the military, it's akin to a declaration of war. So if they were to go as far as most would expect, it would be the authorization of use of military force here against Iran. It's also possible, though, that if this is expected to be a conflict of limited duration, the president would be able to go through the 90 days under the War Powers Resolution and say, we're done here, and therefore would never need the authorization of use of military force.
A lot of interesting things to keep in mind there, and some good perspective in all this, some context as well from John Hanley, UCF political science lecturer, speaking with Fox 35's Marlisa Goldsmith just a little bit ago. Well, that's going to do it for us here on Fox 35 News Plus today. We appreciate you joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. with more Fox 35 News Plus at 2 p.m. with Florida Live, and then another hour of Fox 35 News Plus at 4. We're going to go ahead and send things out, though, to Studio B for the start of Fox 35 News at 5, which begins right now on Fox Local.
Fox 35 News starts now with breaking news.
Breaking news right now in the Middle East. Iran launches multiple ballistic missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar. Explosions were seen in the skies above that base. This video shows those rockets being intercepted by Qatar's missile defense system. Now, of course, this follows an attack by the U.S. on 3 Iranian nuclear sites